I'm Teresa Runstedler. I am a full professor in the history department at American University, and I'm also the chair of the critical race, gender, and culture studies department there. But my primary appointment is in history, and that's where I work with both MA and PhD students. I actually started out my career at the University at Buffalo in 2007, so right before the economic collapse. I just sort of got in there and managed to get a tenure track job, which, I saw many of my colleagues who were like maybe a year or two behind me get really impacted by the 2008 financial crisis. But that's where I started mentoring my first graduate students in American studies. So I've mentored a lot of grad students across the spectrum of folks who are more so doing women's studies, folks who are doing African American studies, history, the whole gamut. But where I am now, and I've been there since 2013, in the history program, we have a regular MA program, we have a public history MA program, and a PhD program, which is really tiny. We only let in about 3 students a year because our funding is really terrible. Even though they're unionized, they are not paid a living wage. Many of the MA students that I work with also work full-time. So I teach them in the evenings. And for the PhD students, because the stipends are so low compared to the cost of living in DC, they all have side gigs. And in fact, I have a student who's writing a dissertation while she's a full-time civil servant in the federal government. And I've sort of seen her get fired and then rehired and then furloughed, and then now she's back working again. So that's been super disruptive for her dissertation progress. But I think one of the things that I do working with graduate students who are in this kind of financial precarity is rather than look at what they're doing outside of the classroom as a distraction from their studies, I found that they often are able to parlay those jobs into career opportunities after grad school. So much of my mentorship involves guiding students in conceptualizing and finishing their dissertations while doing other work, both in and outside of the higher ed space. So many do actually, and I encourage them to do local projects because they can develop relationships with institutions and organizations. I have friends and alumni from our program who talk about different career paths. I always invite them into our graduate colloquia to talk about, what does it mean to be a research for hire consultant? What does it mean to be a public history contractor? And they can, even though I don't know how to tell them how to go after those kinds of opportunities, I can put them in contact with people who do know how to do those things. So that's sort of my connection to graduate education and professionalization. I've worked at 2 institutions where folks really have to find ways to make a way out of no way. And again, rather than looking at that as a drawback, trying to turn that into opportunity. And when we talk about alt-ac careers, I went through actually and did a whole list of all the students I've worked with.
So diving into professionalization, I'd love to know what your thoughts are about how professionalization opportunities and training are provided or not being provided to PhD students at your institutions. And there's a number of directions from which this could be approached. It could be your personal experience as a graduate student. It could be what you're seeing. It could be what you personally are doing. It could even be what you think we should be doing as institutions and training centers for graduate students in the future.
You actually just made me think of something because Rebecca and I went to the same graduate school together, and a lot of our colleagues were very involved in the graduate student union. Many of them actually went on to become legit high-level union organizers. So they graduated, got their PhDs, and went and used the skills that they learned, right, and the knowledge, the frameworks, et cetera, then to go and work with unions both in the United States and Canada. I'll be quick here because my university as a whole does not really have anything formal to foster professionalization of grad students, unfortunately. Everything happens informally. Really up until this year, with the Trump administration. PhD students often were able to find work in DC as government contractors. So I had a couple of point people that I could direct folks to so that they would know how to, sign up into and make themselves available to be government contractors. Some working, we have lots of links with the Smithsonian and other public humanities institutions, public historical sites in DC, but it'll be interesting to see how this pans out now with the sort of deconstruction of the state that's going on right now. We do have a public history MA program. They have built into their curriculum a practicum. I think they have to take a couple of these, and they work with a faculty member and then also somebody at a DC institution, often the Smithsonian, and they actually put together research that will inform an exhibit. We used to have an institutional membership to the NCFDD, if anyone knows what that is, a National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. I might have that the wrong way around, but it was canceled. I'm experiencing all sorts of budget cuts at my institution. And so we're entering a whole new level of cuts. And so that was actually the first thing to go. One particularly notable project at American University is the Humanities Truck. I can't claim any credit for this. This is the brainchild of my colleague, Dan Kerr, and you can Google it. It's humanitiestruck.com, and it's literally a truck. It's like a food truck, except for the humanities. And students can actually, get fellowships to work with this humanities truck, and they, learn how to drive it. And they go to wherever it is in DC to do oral histories and other modes of partnering with local communities to tell their stories. So it's an amazing project. So I encourage folks to take a look at that. The only other thing that I will say is that I actually, before I went to grad school, I was a professional dancer. So I worked in the gig economy in the late 90s. And I also worked in sports media, public relations. So I had already this experience of what it's like to work in many different environments, and then also how to piece together, the pennies to pay your rent. And so I try as much as possible to use some of that experience to also inform how I mentor students and strategies that they can use to stay organized and, put themselves out there, and also to recognize the skills that they actually are learning through doing things that you wouldn't think are professionalization.